Hey all, this is the Agile Podcast. I'm Hans Anderson, the producer of this podcast. And for the final episode of this season, I've been asked to do a story about what I learned about Drupal. And let me just start with this. I'm a Drupal novice. Even though I've spent the last 5 months thinking about the content management system, I don't really know what's going on under the hood. I know the hierarchy of data to template. I know some of the lingo. I know the general concepts. I know a lot about the difference between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, Drupal 9, WordPress, Backdrop CMS. But I'm not a Drupal developer. I'm more interested in stories and the different people behind Drupal. So when I think about the move from D7 to D8 or D9, I'm not thinking about Symfony or contrib modules. I think about the first time I heard about Drupal. This is back in the early 2010s, maybe 2011 or 2012. At the time, my brother-in-law's coworker and friend, Matt Mowers, had a dream.
I wanted to break out and become an entrepreneur.
That's Matt. Being
Being entrepreneurial was like huge, and for me, because I was like part of this bureaucracy at NREL,
NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab near Denver. Matt worked there back in 2012 as an energy analyst, working on things like integrating wind and solar into the US electrical grid, or policy around renewable energy. And he liked the job, but hated the bureaucracy around his work. So he wanted to break free. He wanted to work for himself.
I didn't know at all what to do. I had an idea for a website though. And the website was a map of events. So it would be basically, you'd go to it, it would be a map that had, time-dependent information on it. And you could look for events.
So basically a visual representation of where happy hours were in a city, or concerts, or a personal favorite, karaoke nights.
That was the idea. And then, connection to Drupal. So I talked to people on the web team at the National Renewable Energy Lab. And at that point, I don't know if it's the case anymore, but there were Drupal developers at the National Renewable Energy Lab. And one of them, recommended that this would be the fastest way to put up, a website with this map of events. Which in retrospect, I don't know if that's true, especially because when I started to look into Drupal, it was very, very hard to start learning the coding side of Drupal. The really customization side of Drupal was like quite difficult. I cut my hours down at the National Renewable Energy Lab, and like every Friday, I would start working on Drupal.
It was his take it out of his boring job, and the site would be called
Mappening, which was not my idea actually. Someone else had that brilliant idea, but Mappening became the name of this site. That was the story of how it started and how I started down the Drupal path.
Matt eventually quit his job and moved in with his parents in Ames, Iowa. The plan? Spend more time learning Drupal. So I briefly stayed in Denver around the time Matt moved to Ames. There was a lot of talk amongst my sister and her husband about what Matt was doing and this thing called Drupal. I pretty much lost touch with Matt. I hadn't really talked to him in years. I'd hear about him occasionally from my brother-in-law or sister. And then earlier this year, I started working on a podcast about Drupal, this podcast, and immediately my mind went back to Matt Mowers and Mappening. It made a lot more sense to me. Back in 2012, Matt was asking people what to use to stand up Mappening at a time when Drupal was growing rapidly. Drupal 7 had just been released, which we've talked about in the past. It was a time of explosive growth. A lot of people saw Drupal and open source as the future. Add this to the mentality of Drupal being the best solution for everything. It's something I've heard a lot as we interview people for this podcast. Sure, you can do almost anything in Drupal, but it's not always the best solution. But something else that Matt's story tells us relates to the community around the CMS. Drupal relies on developers, people who donate their time to patch bugs and maintain contrib modules. A lot of developers took up Drupal, either from other CMSs or on a whim, because someone told them that it was the best way to do something. We spoke to Jen and Nate Lambton this season, who both learned Drupal and eventually forked the code to create Backdrop CMS. We spoke with Ashraf Abed, who learned Drupal from a book and then started his own Drupal school. We talked to Angelina developers like Carlos Fernandez, who was asked to learn Drupal for work because he had a PHP background, or Gordon, Shafali, John, Virginia, Luis, people who learn Drupal and are part of that community, who all have stories that may have similar pieces but different outcomes. They develop different relationships with Drupal and create different products, do different jobs. So after learning about Drupal for a little while, one big question was, whatever happened to Matt Mowers?
Mappening was not, easy to sell. as in, it was, for one, it was, in retrospect, it was really ugly. It was a very ugly website. I don't have any I couldn't find a team of people to work with that were interested in this idea that had any sense of style.
So Matt's first attempt at entrepreneurship didn't go exactly as planned. After living in Iowa with his parents, working on Mappening, he made the trip to California.
My idea was to go out there and to live in my car and to start pursuing web development. So that's what I did.
So he was living out of his car, which was actually kind of a dream of his. He'd gone to school in the Bay Area and had been in awe of the beauty of the place.
I was like, why does anyone ever rent in this? It's so beautiful out here. Why does anyone ever rent? I remember thinking that in college. And so I fulfilled that dream as well.
And this whole time, he's trying to be an entrepreneur, launch sites, sell them, make money. He had this thing called Groutsprout, which was this kind of location-based social networking site. You could leave comments in places like cafes and restaurants. That didn't really take off.
So at some point I was like, I need to get a more, solid development skill set. And I thought, I can probably do that at a company. And so started looking for Drupal jobs.
And he got a job at a cloud hosting and file transfer company. He was the first Drupal developer they'd hired.
In the interview, I asked them, do you want to see some code I've written? And then I walked through some of that code. And, they thought, well, this follows a lot of, good principles. So yeah, let's hire this guy. So I got hired to basically be that kind of first full-time hire for this new Drupal website. I was pretty green. I was not an expert in building websites in Drupal, if that's not apparent already.
One of the biggest tasks at his job was moving to Drupal 8 from Drupal 7. Though it wasn't a data migration. He just rebuilt everything from scratch.
So I think a big part of the pain is migration of content. I believe we just rebuilt rebuilt new content, essentially.
He's working there and he contributes this one big thing to the Drupal community, a custom module for A/B testing. And just so we're all on the same page, A/B testing is user experience testing where you show people one of two different presentations and see how people respond differently to it. Then Matt applied for a job for the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016 as a Java developer. It was late in the campaign and he didn't get the job, but he volunteered for her in Story County, his home county in Iowa. And then he was just done with development. If he's being honest, he really doesn't miss it that much.
It's a big mess, right? All web development is a large mess. There's a large amount of things, technologies you're using together. And I don't think I operate that way. I operate I can go I want to go kind of deep into one type of thing, but having to deal with a large mess of things that are interconnected is not fun for me.
So he essentially went back to the job that he had left to be an entrepreneur and launch Mappening in 2012. energy analyst. But now he's a contractor instead of a full-time employee. He likes it. And I've been spending a lot of time thinking about Drupal. And one of the challenges of doing stories about Drupal is that it's hard to convey big ideas in an interesting way. But you can convey some of these big ideas through stories. I don't know exactly the takeaways from Matt's story. I think there's a lot to be said about Drupal in the last decade. It's grown really fast. It's attracted a lot of developers who have been really involved in the community. Many are still heavily involved, but others leave. Regardless, Drupal 7's retirement is a time to reflect on the stories of Drupal in the last decade. For some, it was part of their start as a developer or a way to make money or to be a part of a community they believed in. Or it was an aspirational tool, a means to escape the drudgery of a 9-to-5 job, even just for a little while. Throughout this season, we've talked to some really amazing developers who all have different reasons for working in Drupal. With the move to Drupal 9 and the Symfony framework, this marks a new chapter for the CMS, one that may attract different developers for different reasons entirely. We can only really speculate about what the future holds for Drupal. But as Drupal 7 reaches its end of life, however you use the CMS and wherever you plan to go, I think this quote from Lucas, a developer at Agelina, sums up my feelings for D7.
I will say, Drupal 7 served you well, but it deserves a good retirement.
That wraps up season 1 of the Agile podcast. We'll be back early next year with a new season focusing on Agile careers, so stay tuned. The Agile podcast is produced by Agelina, a DC-based web development company. To learn more about Agelina, you can visit our website, agelina.com, or send us an email to results@agelina.com. That's AGILEANA.com. Talk to you in a few months.